Welcome back, my love. I'm Rose. Take a deep breath, settle your energy, and listen carefully to this message because today we are stepping into the energy behind one very specific sentence: why they chose silence. If you have been wondering why someone suddenly became quiet, why they stopped explaining themselves, why they pulled away even though there were clearly feelings between you, this reading may bring some clarity. This is a collective reading, so take what resonates with your situation and gently leave the rest behind. There is a person here who has been carrying words they never said. They thought about reaching out, they typed messages and deleted them. They picked up their phone, looked at your name, and then put it down again. From the outside, their silence may have looked like indifference. But underneath that silence, there was a lot more happening. And the first message coming through is this: they didn't choose silence because they had nothing to say. They chose silence because they didn't know how to say what they were truly feeling. There is a difference. Sometimes people become quiet when their emotions become too complicated to explain. They don't know whether to apologize, confess, ask for another chance, or simply disappear. And this person may have reached a point where every possible conversation felt frightening. Because if they spoke honestly, they knew they could no longer hide behind their usual behavior. They would have to admit what you meant to them. They would have to acknowledge the things they did wrong. They would have to explain why they behaved the way they did. And most importantly, they would have to face your reaction. That is what made silence feel safer. Not necessarily better, just safer. Because silence allowed them to avoid a conversation they weren't emotionally prepared to have. I feel that this person has replayed certain moments between you again and again. A conversation, a goodbye, something they said, something they didn't say. Perhaps there was a moment when they saw disappointment in your eyes and they never forgot it. They may wonder whether you still think about them. They may wonder whether you are angry. They may wonder whether you've moved on. And there is something very interesting here. They may actually believe that you deserve better than the version of them you experienced. That thought has contributed to their distance. They know they weren't completely honest with you. Maybe they were emotionally inconsistent. Maybe they gave you attention and then disappeared. Maybe they made you feel like you had to guess where you stood. And instead of confronting their behavior, they withdrew. They convinced themselves that staying away was somehow protecting you. But deep down, they also knew they were protecting themselves. Because if they came closer again, the feelings would become impossible to ignore. And this person has been trying very hard to control those feelings. You may have noticed that they became distant at exactly the moment things started feeling deeper. That is not an accident in this energy. When the connection began becoming emotionally serious, fear entered the picture. They could handle attraction. They could handle curiosity. They could handle casual conversations. But emotional vulnerability? That was different. Because vulnerability means allowing another person to see the parts of you that you normally keep hidden. And this person wasn't ready for that. So they chose silence. They may have told themselves, "Let me give this some space. Maybe they'll forget about me. Maybe it's better if I don't make things more complicated. Maybe I should just leave them alone." But every time they tried to convince themselves that they were doing the right thing, something inside them continued pulling them back towards you. And this is where the energy becomes emotional, because silence didn't necessarily make them forget you. It gave them more time to think about you. When there were no conversations, there were memories. When there were no messages, there were questions. When there was distance, there was reflection. And they may have started realizing things they couldn't see when you were still close. They began understanding your importance after experiencing your absence. Your silence may have affected them too. They may have expected you to chase them. They may have expected you to ask what happened. They may have expected you to keep the connection alive. But when you didn't, something changed. They realized that you were capable of walking away too, and that realization may have forced them to look at themselves. There is also an energy of pride here. This person may not want you to know how deeply your absence affected them. They don't want to appear vulnerable. They don't want you to know how often they think about contacting you. So instead, they maintain the appearance of being completely fine. But appearances can be misleading. Someone can look perfectly calm while internally having 1,000 conversations with themselves. And this person has been having those conversations. They may be asking, should I contact them? What would I even say? What if they don't respond? What if they have someone else now? What if they ask me why I disappeared? And that last question is especially powerful because they know you may ask for an explanation and they know they don't have a simple answer. The truth is probably complicated. It could involve fear, insecurity, timing, personal circumstances, emotional immaturity, or simply not knowing how to handle the intensity of the connection. But whatever the reason, their silence created a wound, and part of them knows that. They may regret not communicating better. They may wish they had explained themselves instead of leaving you to create your own answers. Because when someone disappears without explanation, the person left behind often starts blaming themselves. You may have wondered, was I too much? Did I say something wrong? Did they lose interest? Was everything between us imaginary? And the message here is, don't automatically make their silence a reflection of your worth. Their inability to communicate does not mean you were unworthy of communication. Their fear does not mean you were difficult to love. Their confusion does not mean the connection meant nothing. Sometimes people run from what they cannot emotionally process. And this person may have been running from their own feelings more than they were running from you. There is also something they wish they could tell you. They want you to know that their silence wasn't meant to punish you. They weren't necessarily trying to make you suffer. They were trying to regain control over themselves, but in doing so, they created more confusion for you. And now there is a sense that they are slowly becoming aware of the consequences. They may realize that silence doesn't erase feelings, distance doesn't automatically bring closure, and time doesn't always make someone forget. Sometimes time simply makes the truth louder. I feel that this person has reached a point where they are questioning whether staying silent was actually the right decision. They may still hesitate. They may still overthink. But the certainty they once had about walking away is no longer there. Something has changed inside them. And for some of you, this could eventually lead to communication. Not necessarily a dramatic confession. It may begin with something very simple: a short message, a reaction, a casual question, an unexpected appearance. Something that seems small on the surface but carries much more emotion underneath. Because when someone has been silent for a long time, the first step back toward communication can feel enormous to them. They know that once they open that door, they cannot control what happens next, and that is what scares them. They may fear rejection. They may fear accountability. They may fear that you've changed. They may fear that the version of you they remember no longer exists. And honestly, you may have changed. Their absence may have taught you something too. Maybe it taught you not to chase people for answers. Maybe it taught you to value consistency. Maybe it taught you that love should not constantly leave you questioning where you stand. And if they return, they will have to meet the version of you that grew while they were gone. That is important. Don't pause your life waiting for someone else to become ready. Keep moving. Keep growing. Keep choosing yourself. If they genuinely want to return, let their actions demonstrate that intention. Words can be beautiful, but consistency is what creates trust. And if this person eventually explains why they chose silence, listen carefully. Not just to what they say, but to whether their behavior supports it. Because the purpose of this message isn't to convince you to wait. It is to help you understand that sometimes silence has a story behind it. You don't always get to hear that story immediately. Sometimes people need distance before they can understand themselves. Sometimes they need to lose access to you before they recognize your value. And sometimes they remain silent because speaking would require them to finally be honest. So if you've been asking yourself, why did they stop calling? Why did they disappear? Why did they choose silence? The energy here says they were afraid of what would happen if they told you the truth. They were afraid of their own emotions, afraid of vulnerability, afraid of rejection, afraid of being held accountable, and perhaps most of all, afraid that once they admitted how much they cared, they would no longer be able to walk away so easily. But remember something important. You don't have to solve their fear for them. You don't have to chase their silence. You don't have to convince someone to communicate with you. Your responsibility is to protect your peace. If communication returns, allow it to come with clarity, allow it to come with honesty, allow it to come with effort. And if it doesn't, don't believe that their silence means you weren't important. Sometimes someone leaves because they don't know how to handle the importance of a connection. Take one final deep breath, release the questions you cannot answer today. Release the need to know exactly what they're thinking every second. And trust that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself. Maybe one day they will finally say the words they've been holding inside. I'm sorry I disappeared. I didn't know how to handle what I felt. I was scared. I chose silence because I didn't know how to tell you the truth. Until then, keep choosing yourself. Keep living. Keep becoming the person you were meant to become. Because sometimes the greatest closure isn't hearing why someone walked away. Sometimes it's realizing that their silence no longer controls your peace. And if they do return, let them meet you where you are now, not where they left you. This chapter is still unfolding. Their silence may have been part of the story, but it does not have to be the ending. If this message resonated with you, take what feels true, leave what doesn't, and let the universe handle the parts you cannot control. Your peace matters, your heart matters, and you deserve communication that doesn't leave you constantly wondering. Remember that. And until the next reading, take care of yourself, protect your energy, and trust the path unfolding in front of you. Sometimes the silence was never about the absence of feeling. Sometimes it was about the inability to speak. And eventually, the truth always finds a way to become louder than the silence.